Ancient Egyptian dating, love, lust, and heartbreak along the Nile. Hey everyone! Today we're diving into something absolutely wild. What dating was like in ancient Egypt. And let me tell you, these people were dealing with the same relationship drama we face today, except with way more eyeliner and the constant threat of being cursed for eternity by your ex. You think modern dating is complicated? Try explaining to your crush that you're into them while wearing enough gold jewelry to blind a camel and worrying about whether your love rival might slip crocodile dung into your beer. Yes, that was actually a thing. Ancient Egyptians were absolutely unhinged when it came to love, and I'm here for it. So grab your kohl eyeliner and let's travel back in time to see how our ancestors were sliding into DMs, except their DMs were literally hieroglyphics carved into stone, and sometimes those messages were so thirsty they could have watered the entire Nile Delta. But first, let's understand what made someone attractive in ancient Egypt, because their beauty standards were completely different from today's Instagram culture. For women, being thick wasn't just preferred, it was essential. We're talking full hips, round bellies, and generous curves everywhere. If you looked like you could survive a famine, you were basically Cleopatra-level gorgeous. Skinny was associated with poverty and sickness, so ancient Egyptian women were out here embracing their curves thousands of years before body positivity became trendy. The ideal woman was described in ancient texts as having thighs like pillars and arms like branches of the Persea tree. Modern women might cringe at being compared to tree branches, but in ancient Egypt this was the ultimate compliment. It meant you were strong, sturdy, and could bear healthy children. A woman with visible ribs was considered malnourished and unattractive. Ancient Egyptian men wanted partners who looked well-fed and prosperous. Breasts were celebrated in art and literature, often described in elaborate detail. Ancient Egyptian love poetry includes lines like, "Your breasts are like clusters of grapes," which sounds weird now but was incredibly romantic back then. The bigger and more prominent, the better. Ancient Egyptian bra were basically push-up devices made of linen designed to enhance and display what nature provided. Ancient Egyptian women also had specific beauty rituals that would make modern influencers jealous. They created face masks from honey, milk, and ground almonds. They used oils infused with frankincense and myrrh to keep their skins soft and fragrant. Some wealthy women even bathed in donkey milk, believing it would keep them young and beautiful. Cleopatra supposedly took milk baths regularly, which explains why she managed to seduce both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. The makeup game was absolutely unreal. Egyptian women lined their eyes with so much kohl they could probably be seen from the pyramids. This wasn't just about looking pretty, it was psychological warfare. Those dramatic, smoky eyes made women look mysterious, divine, and slightly dangerous. Every woman was basically going for that "I might be a goddess, I might curse you, but either way, you're attracted to me" vibe. The kohl wasn't just cosmetic either. It served practical purposes. The dark makeup protected their eyes from the harsh desert sun and helped prevent eye infections. Ancient Egyptians made their eyeliner from ground galena or malachite mixed with oils and fats. The application process was an art form, with specific brushes and techniques passed down from mother to daughter. Women also used red ochre for lip color and cheek rouge. They mixed this mineral pigment with oils to create the ancient equivalent of lipstick. The goal was to look healthy, vibrant, and sexually appealing. A pale, washed-out complexion suggested illness or death, not exactly attractive qualities in a potential partner. Hair was everything too, whether natural or a wig, and yes, wigs were huge. The more elaborate your hairstyle, the more dates you got. Bald was definitely not beautiful in ancient Egypt. If you lost your hair, you immediately invested in the best wig money could buy, complete with braids, beads, and enough accessories to start your own jewelry store. Ancient Egyptian wigs were incredible works of art. The wealthy commissioned custom wigs made from human hair, sometimes imported from other countries. These wigs could be styled in elaborate configurations with gold threads, precious stones, and intricate braiding patterns. Some wigs were so heavy, they required practice to wear properly without developing neck problems. Natural hair was also heavily styled and decorated. Women used beeswax and resin to hold elaborate updos in place. Hair accessories included gold bands, jeweled combs, and decorative pins. The time and effort invested in hair care was enormous. Wealthy women employed personal hairdressers who spent hours each day maintaining their mistress's appearance. Men's hair standards were equally demanding. While they kept their facial hair clean-shaven, head hair was styled with oils and sometimes curled or braided. Baldness in men was considered aging and unattractive, so they also invested in wigs when necessary. The difference was that men's wigs were typically shorter and less ornate than women's versions. Now for the men, and this is where it gets really different from today. Egyptian men were obsessed with being completely hairless. We're talking smooth as a baby's bottom. Beards were only for gods and pharaohs, so regular guys spent hours with tweezers and razors achieving that perfect clean-shaven look. Imagine explaining to your barber that you need to be hairless everywhere because having facial hair makes you look like a peasant. The hair removal process was intense. Men used bronze razors, tweezers, and even pumice stones to remove unwanted hair. Some wealthy men employed personal groomers whose job was maintaining their hairless appearance. The process was time-consuming and sometimes painful, but it was considered essential for attractiveness and social status. Ancient Egyptian men also removed body hair from their chests, legs, and arms. This wasn't just a cosmetic choice, it was practical in the hot desert climate and helped prevent lice and other parasites. But it also became a beauty standard that distinguished civilized Egyptians from barbaric foreigners who let their hair grow wild. The exception was pharaohs, who wore artificial beards as symbols of divine authority. These fake beards were attached with straps and were purely ceremonial. Regular men who grew natural beards were considered uncivilized, foreign, or rebellious. It was like the ultimate fashion rule. No facial hair unless you were literally a god king. Physical fitness mattered, but not in a gym bro way. Think more, I can carry heavy stones for pyramid building, rather than I do CrossFit. Practical strength was sexy because it meant you could actually provide for a family, not just look good shirtless on papyrus scrolls. Ancient Egyptian men were expected to have lean, muscular builds that demonstrated their ability to work hard and protect their families. The ideal male body was athletic but not bulky, more like a swimmer or runner than a bodybuilder. Fat men were considered lazy and unattractive, while overly thin men appeared weak and poor. Physical competitions were common at festivals and religious celebrations. Men would compete in wrestling, swimming, archery, and other sports to demonstrate their fitness and attract potential partners. These competitions were like ancient Egyptian dating shows. Young women would watch and evaluate the men's physical abilities and overall attractiveness. Military service also contributed to male attractiveness. Soldiers were considered prime marriage material because they had proven their courage, strength, and loyalty to the pharaoh. Veterans often had their pick of potential wives when they returned from successful campaigns. And here's something that might make you uncomfortable. Circumcision was considered super attractive. It was a rite of passage that proved you were a proper Egyptian man. Sorry to any uncircumcised guys listening, but in ancient Egypt, you were basically the equivalent of someone still using a flip phone in 2024. The procedure was performed on boys around age 10 to 14 and was cause for celebration. Families would throw parties to mark their son's transition to manhood. Circumcision served both religious and practical purposes. It was believed to please the gods and demonstrate devotion to Egyptian traditions. It also had hygienic benefits in a hot climate where bathing wasn't always convenient. But beyond these practical considerations, circumcised men were simply considered more attractive and marriageable. The procedure itself was performed by priests or specialized practitioners using sharp flint knives. Recovery took several weeks, during which the boy was pampered and treated as a hero. The resulting scar was worn with pride as proof of Egyptian identity and religious devotion. Uncircumcised men faced social stigma and limited marriage prospects. They were often assumed to be foreigners or from lower social classes. Some adult men even underwent the procedure later in life to improve their dating prospects, though this was more dangerous and socially awkward. Now let's talk about how people actually met each other, because dating apps didn't exist. But the struggle was real. The most common place to find love was at religious festivals, which were basically ancient Egypt's version of Coachella mixed with Tinder. These weren't quiet, solemn religious events. They were massive parties with music, dancing, drinking, and plenty of opportunities for young people to mingle while pretending to worship the gods. Religious festivals happened throughout the year and provided the primary social opportunities for unmarried people. The festival of Hathor was particularly wild. Hathor was the goddess of love, beauty, and basically everything fun, so her festivals were like Valentine's Day, spring break, and New Year's Eve, all rolled into one intoxicating celebration. Young people would dress in their finest clothes, drink beer mixed with honey, and dance until they found someone who caught their eye. The festival of Opet in Thebes lasted for several weeks and attracted people from across Egypt. During this celebration, the boundaries between social classes relaxed somewhat, allowing people who normally wouldn't interact to meet and mingle. Young nobles might find themselves dancing with merchants' daughters, while scribes could catch the attention of noblemen's sisters. Music and dancing were central to these festivals, providing natural opportunities for flirtation. The dancing was often highly sexual and provocative by our standards, but it was considered normal religious expression. Young people could touch, hold, and move together in ways that would be scandalous in other contexts. Alcohol flowed freely at these celebrations, which certainly helped lower inhibitions and encourage romantic connections. Beer was the most common drink, often flavored with dates, honey, or herbs. Wine was available for the wealthy, and some festivals featured special intoxicating beverages made from fermented fruits. The religious context provided perfect cover for romantic pursuits. Young people could claim they were simply celebrating the gods while actually scoping out potential partners. Parents couldn't object to their children attending religious festivals, even though everyone knew romance was a major part of the experience. Markets were another popular meeting spot. Ancient Egyptian bazaars were social hubs where practical shopping met romantic possibilities. A young woman buying bread might catch the eye of a handsome potter, and suddenly they're having a conversation about his ceramic techniques while she's wondering if he's single and he's trying to figure out if she's interested or just really enthusiastic about pottery. Market interactions had to be subtle and careful, since both men and women were usually accompanied by family members or servants. The art was in making meaningful eye contact, asking leading questions about merchandise, or finding excuses to return to the same stall multiple times. A woman might develop a sudden intense interest in a particular merchant's goods, returning daily to examine his wares and engage in increasingly personal conversations. Merchants had advantages in the dating market because they met many people and could afford to give small gifts to potential romantic interests. A spice merchant might offer free samples to attractive customers, while a jewelry maker could create custom pieces as courtship gifts. The market setting also allowed people to display their wealth and taste through their purchases. Professional matchmakers operated in markets, introducing suitable singles for a fee. These entrepreneurs knew everyone's family situation, financial status, and romantic availability. They could arrange accidental meetings between compatible people or provide information about potential partners' backgrounds and interests. But here's where ancient Egypt gets modern. Family connections were huge. Aunts, uncles, and family friends served as informal matchmakers, setting up their relatives with suitable partners. It was like having a personal dating app run by your relatives, except instead of swiping right, your aunt would corner you at a family dinner and say, "I know a lovely scribe who would be perfect for you." Extended families took matchmaking seriously because marriages affected the entire clan's social and economic status. A good marriage could bring business opportunities, political connections, and financial advantages to everyone involved. Conversely, a bad marriage could damage the family's reputation and prospects. Family matchmakers had extensive knowledge of available singles in their social circles. They knew who was looking for a spouse, what qualities they desired, and what they could offer in return. This information network was incredibly efficient, much more so than random encounters at festivals or markets. The matchmaking process involved careful investigation of potential partners' backgrounds, including their family's reputation, financial situation, health history, and personal character. References were checked, and discreet inquiries were made about the person's habits, temperament, and romantic history. Once a suitable match was identified, the family would arrange an introduction. This might happen at a dinner party, religious ceremony, or social gathering where both parties could meet in a chaperoned environment. The initial meeting was usually brief and formal, designed to assess basic compatibility and mutual attraction. If the first meeting went well, families would arrange additional opportunities for the couple to spend time together. These interactions were always supervised, but allowed the potential partners to have conversations and evaluate each other's personalities. The process could take months as both sides carefully considered the match. Family pressure could be intense during this process. Parents had strong opinions about suitable partners and weren't shy about expressing them. Young people who rejected family-approved matches faced significant emotional pressure and sometimes financial consequences. The flirting techniques were absolutely incredible. Ancient Egyptians wrote some of the most beautiful and hilariously dramatic love letters in human history. These weren't quick texts. They were full literary productions written on papyrus and delivered by servants. Imagine getting a love letter that says, "My heart is not yet released from love of you. It is better for me than food and drink." That's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of "you up," but with way more poetry and desperation. Here's an actual ancient Egyptian love poem that survived to modern times. "The love of my sister is on yonder side of the stream, and a flood lies between us, and a crocodile waits on the sandbank. But when I go down into the water, I find the flood bears me up like solid ground. It will be her love that makes me strong. She has made a water spell for me." This guy is literally saying he would brave crocodile-infested waters for love. Modern dating complaints about driving across town suddenly seem pretty weak in comparison. Ancient Egyptian men were out here risking death by reptile just to see their crushes. Another surviving love letter reads, "I wish I were her Nubian maid who is in attendance on her. Then I would see the color of all her limbs." This is basically ancient Egyptian for "I want to see you naked," but with enough poetic metaphor to maintain some dignity. The sophistication of these romantic writings suggests that literacy was considered extremely attractive. The delivery of love letters was an elaborate process. Wealthy suitors employed trusted servants as messengers, while middle-class romantics might ask friends or family members to carry their messages. The messenger's discretion was crucial, since inappropriate romantic communications could cause scandals. Some love letters were written on expensive papyrus with high-quality ink and elaborate calligraphy. These were designed to impress recipients with both the content and presentation. The physical beauty of the letter itself was part of the romantic gesture. Poetry was especially valued in romantic correspondence. Ancient Egyptians appreciated clever wordplay, religious imagery, and nature metaphors in their love poems. References to gods, animals, and natural phenomena showed education and creativity. The more elaborate and artistic the poem, the more impressive it was to the recipient. They also had the flower game down to a science. Giving someone a lotus flower was like sending a heart emoji, but with actual meaning. The lotus symbolized rebirth and beauty, so offering one was basically saying, "You make me feel reborn, and you're gorgeous." Much more romantic than sliding into someone's DMs with a fire emoji. Different flowers carried different romantic messages. Lotus blossoms were the most popular, representing purity, rebirth, and divine beauty. Blue lotuses were associated with the sun god and symbolized eternal love, while white lotuses represented spiritual purity and devotion. Papyrus flowers were also romantically significant, representing Lower Egypt and the fertile Nile Delta. Offering papyrus flowers suggested abundance, fertility, and prosperity, important qualities in a potential marriage partner. The presentation of flowers was as important as the flowers themselves. They might be arranged in elaborate bouquets, woven into garlands, or presented individually with accompanying messages. The freshness and quality of the flowers demonstrated the giver's effort and attention to detail. Flower giving had seasonal significance too. Certain flowers were only available at specific times of year, making them more precious and meaningful. A suitor who remembered his beloved's favorite flower and presented it at exactly the right moment showed remarkable thoughtfulness and dedication. Some flowers were believed to have magical properties. Mandrake flowers were thought to inspire passion and desire, while jasmine was associated with divine love. Superstitious romantics might choose flowers not just for their beauty, but for their supposed supernatural effects on the recipient. Music was another major seduction tool. If you could play the harp, lute, or sistrum, You were basically ancient Egypt's version of the guy with a guitar at a party, except actually cool. Musicians were incredibly attractive, and a well-timed song could melt hearts faster than the desert sun melts ice. Musical serenades were common courtship techniques. Young men would hire professional musicians to perform outside their beloved's home, or if they were talented themselves, compose and perform original pieces. The harp was considered particularly romantic. Its soft, melodious tones were perfect for intimate serenades. The sistrum, a sacred rattle associated with the goddess Hathor, was both a religious instrument and a tool of seduction. Women who could play the sistrum skillfully were considered blessed by the goddess of love and were highly sought after as marriage partners. Singing was equally important. Both men and women were expected to have pleasant voices and know popular songs. Group singing at festivals and parties provided opportunities for potential partners to showcase their musical abilities and harmonize together, literally and figuratively. Original compositions were the ultimate romantic gesture. A man who wrote a song specifically for his beloved demonstrated creativity, dedication, and deep feeling. These personalized serenades often became treasured keepsakes, remembered long after the relationship ended. Musical competitions at festivals served as ancient Egyptian talent shows where young people could impress potential partners with their skills. Winners gained social recognition and were considered prime marriage material. Musical ability was seen as a sign of good breeding, education, and sensitivity. Gift-giving was serious business too. This wasn't just flowers and chocolate, we're talking strategic present warfare. Men would give women jewelry, perfumes, and fine clothing. Women would give men amulets, food, and handmade items. It was a competition of who could give the most thoughtful, expensive, or personal gift. Some guys probably went broke trying to impress their crushes. Jewelry was the most prestigious gift category. Gold rings, necklaces, and bracelets demonstrated wealth and serious romantic intentions. The quality of the gold, the craftsmanship of the piece, and the appropriateness of the design all sent messages about the giver's feelings and expectations. Perfumes and cosmetics were intimate gifts that showed knowledge of the recipient's personal preferences. High-quality coal, scented oils, and rare cosmetic ingredients were expensive and demonstrated the giver's attention to detail. These gifts were also practical, helping the recipient maintain their attractiveness. Clothing gifts required careful consideration of the recipient's style, social status, and body type. Fine linen garments were valuable and appreciated, but they had to be appropriate for the person's lifestyle and position. A poorly chosen garment could be seen as insulting or presumptuous. Food gifts showed practical consideration and domestic awareness. Specially prepared delicacies, rare ingredients, or elaborately decorated dishes demonstrated both wealth and thoughtfulness. These gifts were often shared, providing opportunities for intimate conversations over meals. Religious amulets were deeply personal gifts that showed concern for the recipient's spiritual well-being and protection. Choosing the right amulet required knowledge of the person's fears, hopes, and religious beliefs. These gifts carried emotional weight beyond their material value. Handmade gifts were particularly meaningful because they represented time, effort, and personal skill. A woman who embroidered a special garment for her suitor, or a man who carved a unique piece of furniture, showed dedication and creativity that couldn't be purchased. And let's talk about the ancient Egyptian equivalent of the accidental encounter. They had this down to an art form. People would accidentally show up at the same festival, market, or temple as their crush. It was like checking someone's Instagram story to see where they are, then showing up at the same coffee shop, except instead of Starbucks, it was the Temple of Ptah. The planning required for these accidental meetings was extensive. Potential suitors had to learn their target's schedule, favorite locations, and social activities. This information was gathered through careful observation, strategic questions to mutual acquaintances, and sometimes direct espionage. Servants were often recruited as intelligence agents in these romantic operations. A well-placed servant could provide crucial information about their master's or mistress's plans, allowing admirers to position themselves at the right place and time for chance encounters. The execution of these meetings required careful choreography. The encounter had to appear natural and unplanned, while actually being precisely timed and positioned. Too obvious, and the target would realize they were being stalked. Too subtle, and the opportunity would be wasted. Multiple backup plans were essential. If the primary location didn't work out, admirers needed alternative venues where they might, coincidentally, encounter their target. This required extensive knowledge of the person's habits and preferences. The follow-up to these meetings was crucial. The accidental encounter had to lead to natural conversation and further interaction opportunities. Skilled romantics could parlay a single chance meeting into an ongoing relationship through careful planning and strategic follow-up. But dating in ancient Egypt wasn't all lotus flowers and romantic papyrus scrolls. There were some serious red flags to watch out for. If someone was obsessed with their tomb and spent more time planning their afterlife than their actual life, that was a major warning sign. Yes, preparing for death was important, but if they were more interested in their mummy wrappings than your feelings, it was time to move on. The tomb obsession was a real phenomenon among wealthy Egyptians. Some people spent decades planning and constructing elaborate tombs, commissioning artwork, and accumulating grave goods. While this showed good planning skills, it could indicate an unhealthy preoccupation with death. People who constantly talked about their burial plans, showed visitors their tomb decorations, or spent more money on afterlife preparations than current living expenses were considered unbalanced. A reasonable person planned for death but didn't let it dominate their life. Another warning sign was someone who claimed to have special relationships with the gods. While religious devotion was admirable, people who insisted they received personal messages from deities or had supernatural powers were viewed with suspicion. These individuals might be mentally unstable or trying to manipulate others. Financial irresponsibility was another major red flag. People who couldn't manage their current resources, accumulated debts, or made impulsive, expensive purchases were poor marriage prospects. In a society where family resources supported multiple generations, financial stability was crucial. Another red flag was the amulet hoarder. Everyone wore protective charms, but if someone had so many amulets they clinked when they walked, they probably had serious anxiety issues. A few protective charms were normal, looking like a walking jewelry store was concerning. Reasonable people wore amulets for protection against specific threats: the evil eye, disease, accidents, or supernatural dangers. But excessive amulet wearing suggested paranoia, superstition, or an inability to distinguish between real and imaginary threats. The quality and appropriateness of someone's amulets also mattered. Expensive, well-made amulets showed good judgment and financial resources. Cheap, poorly made, or inappropriate amulets suggested poor decision-making or limited resources. Some people collected amulets obsessively, believing that more protection was always better. This behavior indicated an inability to assess risk rationally and could suggest other psychological problems that would affect relationship stability. Wearing amulets for contradictory purposes, like simultaneous protection from fertility and infertility, suggested confused thinking or susceptibility to every superstitious trend. Rational people chose their protective measures carefully and consistently, and if someone claimed to be a scribe, but their love letters looked like they were written by a drunk toddler, they were definitely lying about their job. Education was everything in ancient Egypt, so literacy fraud was a major deal breaker. Scribes held prestigious positions in Egyptian society and were highly sought after as marriage partners. They had steady employment, social status, and valuable skills. But genuine scribes were rare, and some people falsely claimed this profession to improve their romantic prospects. Real scribes had distinctive handwriting styles, knowledge of various script forms, and familiarity with literary and administrative conventions. Their writing was neat, properly formatted, and demonstrated sophisticated vocabulary and grammar skills. Fake scribes revealed themselves through poor handwriting, spelling errors, grammatical mistakes, and unfamiliarity with standard forms and phrases. They might also lack knowledge of mathematical calculations, legal procedures, or administrative practices that real scribes use daily. The consequences of literacy fraud were severe. Discovery could lead to social humiliation, legal penalties, and complete destruction of marriage prospects. Families thoroughly investigated potential partners' claimed qualifications before agreeing to marriages. Professional verification was sometimes necessary. Suspicious families might ask supposed scribes to demonstrate their skills publicly or have their work evaluated by known professionals. This testing could expose fraudulent claims and protect families from deceptive suitors. Now, let's get into the spicy stuff. Ancient Egypt's hookup culture. These people were way more relaxed about casual sex than you might expect. They weren't prudes, and casual relationships were totally normal. Some temples even employed sacred prostitutes who served both religious and social functions. These weren't street workers. They were respected members of society who provided spiritual and physical services. Having relations with a sacred prostitute was considered a religious act, not shameful. Sacred prostitution was associated with various goddesses, particularly Hathor and Isis. Temple prostitutes were often well-educated, musically talented, and skilled in the arts of love. They provided companionship, sexual services, and spiritual guidance to worshippers who sought the goddess's blessings. The religious context elevated these relationships above mere commercial transactions. Participants believed they were communing with the divine through physical intimacy. This spiritual dimension made temple prostitution respectable and even desirable for both men and women. Temple prostitutes underwent extensive training in music, dance, cosmetics, and sexual techniques. They were expected to provide not just physical pleasure, but emotional and spiritual satisfaction. Many became renowned for their beauty, intelligence, and artistic abilities. The economic aspect of temple prostitution was carefully regulated. Prices were standardized, and portions of the fees went to support temple operations and religious activities. This system provided financial independence for women who might otherwise have limited economic opportunities. Some temple prostitutes married and left the profession, while others made it their life's work. The experience was considered valuable preparation for marriage, as these women learned skills that made them attractive and capable wives. Young people often had multiple partners before marriage, and as long as everyone was discreet, nobody really cared. It was like modern hookup culture, but with more incense and fewer awkward morning-after conversations. Ancient Egyptians understood that sexual experience was valuable, and widows or divorcees were actually considered more desirable because they knew what they were doing. Premarital sexual experience was considered normal and even beneficial for both men and women. Young people were expected to learn about sexuality and relationships before committing to marriage. This experiential education helped ensure sexual compatibility and reduced the likelihood of marital problems. Discretion was the key to maintaining respectability during these casual relationships. Public displays of sexuality were discouraged, but private arrangements between consenting adults were accepted. The emphasis was on avoiding scandal rather than preventing sexual activity entirely. Experienced partners were highly valued for their knowledge and skills. A widow who had learned to please her husband or a divorcee who understood male sexuality was considered an excellent marriage prospect. Sexual ignorance was seen as a liability rather than a virtue. The double standard that exists in many cultures was less pronounced in ancient Egypt. Both men and women were expected to have some sexual experience before marriage, and both were judged more on their discretion and selectivity than on their chastity. Birth control methods allowed people to enjoy sexual relationships without unwanted pregnancies. Ancient Egyptians used various contraceptive techniques, including barrier methods, herbal preparations, and timing strategies. This knowledge enabled responsible casual relationships. Even the walk of shame existed in ancient Egypt. If you spent the night at someone's house and had to sneak out in the morning wearing yesterday's linen tunic, people would notice. The difference was that ancient Egyptians were pretty chill about it unless you were married and sneaking around on your spouse. The morning departure from a romantic encounter required careful planning and execution. The goal was to leave discreetly without attracting attention from neighbors, servants, or family members. Success depended on timing, route planning, and sometimes accomplices. Servants were often aware of their employer's romantic activities, but were expected to maintain discretion. A good servant would help facilitate discreet departures by providing alternative routes, clean clothing, or alibis when necessary. The social consequences of being discovered varied depending on the circumstances. Single people faced minimal judgment for consensual relationships, while married individuals caught in adultery could face serious legal and social penalties. Clothing was a major consideration for these encounters. People learned to choose garments that wouldn't wrinkle easily, could be quickly adjusted, or could be explained away if questioned. Some kept spare clothing at their lover's residence to avoid obvious signs of overnight stays. The reputation effects of regular walks of shame could accumulate over time. While individual incidents might be overlooked, patterns of behavior could damage someone's marriage prospects or social standing within the community. Ancient Egyptians were also obsessed with love potions and aphrodisiacs, and some of their remedies were absolutely ridiculous. They thought lettuce was a powerful aphrodisiac because of its milky sap. They literally thought it looked like semen, so obviously it would boost fertility. The logic was questionable, but at least they were eating their vegetables. The lettuce obsession was serious business in ancient Egypt. This vegetable was associated with the god Min, who was responsible for fertility and sexual potency. Lettuce was commonly depicted in religious art and was included in fertility rituals and wedding ceremonies. Ancient Egyptians consumed lettuce in various forms to enhance their sexual abilities. They ate it raw, cooked it in special preparations, and even used lettuce seeds in medicinal compounds. The belief in its aphrodisiac properties was so strong that lettuce became a standard part of romantic meals. The association between lettuce and sexuality extended to agricultural practices. Farmers who grew lettuce were sometimes considered to have special knowledge of fertility and reproduction. Some people even planted lettuce gardens specifically to support their romantic activities. Modern nutritional science suggests that lettuce does contain some nutrients that support general health and energy levels, so the ancient Egyptians weren't completely wrong about its beneficial effects, even if their reasoning was flawed. Mandrake was considered so powerful it could make anyone fall in love with you, but it was also potentially deadly. So using it was literally a matter of love or death. The plant's human-shaped roots were believed to contain supernatural powers that could compel romantic attraction. Mandrake preparation was extremely dangerous and usually performed by professional magicians or herbalists. The plant contains toxic alkaloids that can cause hallucinations, paralysis, and death if used incorrectly. Many people probably died in pursuit of love through mandrake consumption. The harvesting of mandrake was surrounded by elaborate rituals and superstitions. It was supposed to be pulled from the ground at midnight during specific lunar phases, and some traditions required using a dog to pull the plant to avoid cursing the harvester. Despite its dangers, mandrake remained popular throughout ancient Egyptian history. The desperation of unrequited love drove people to take extraordinary risks in pursuit of their romantic goals. The plant's reputation was enhanced by occasional successes that were probably due to placebo effects or coincidence. Legal records include cases of mandrake poisoning, both accidental and intentional. Some people used mandrake to harm romantic rivals or unfaithful partners, while others accidentally overdosed while trying to enhance their own attractiveness. And then there was crocodile dung. Yes, you read that right. Some love potions included crocodile feces. If someone was willing to use crocodile poop to attract you, they were either desperately in love or completely insane, probably both. Crocodile dung was believed to have magical properties because crocodiles were associated with various gods and were considered powerful, dangerous creatures. The logic was that consuming or applying something from such a formidable animal would transfer some of its power to the user. The collection of crocodile dung was obviously hazardous, which added to its mystique and value. Only brave or foolish people would venture close enough to living crocodiles to gather their feces, making it a rare and expensive ingredient. Different types of crocodile dung were believed to have different properties. Fresh dung was considered most potent, while aged dung was thought to have mellowed magical effects. Some recipes specified dung from crocodiles of particular ages or sizes. The preparation methods for crocodile dung love potions were elaborate and varied. It might be mixed with honey, wine, or oils to make it more palatable, or ground into powder and incorporated into food or cosmetics. The smell alone probably killed any romantic mood. Modern analysis of ancient Egyptian medical texts suggests that crocodile dung was also used for contraceptive purposes, which creates an interesting contradiction, using the same substance to both attract lovers and prevent pregnancy from resulting relationships. The much more pleasant option was beer mixed with honey, ancient Egypt's version of a cocktail designed to lower inhibitions and increase attractiveness. Much better than crocodile dung, and probably more effective too. Honey beer was a popular drink at festivals, parties, and romantic encounters. The combination of alcohol and natural sugars created a pleasant, mildly intoxicating beverage that enhanced social interactions and reduced social inhibitions. The preparation of honey beer was considered an art form. Different types of honey produced different flavors, and the fermentation process could be adjusted to create stronger or milder drinks. Some brewers added spices, fruits, or herbs to create signature blends. Serving honey beer was a gesture of hospitality and romantic interest. Offering someone a specially prepared honey beer showed thoughtfulness and sophistication. The sweet taste made it appealing to people who didn't normally drink alcohol. The social rituals around honey beer consumption provided natural opportunities for flirtation and intimate conversation. Sharing drinks from the same vessel was considered romantically suggestive, while offering to prepare someone's drink showed caring attention. Quality honey beer required expensive ingredients and skilled preparation, so serving it demonstrated wealth and social status. The ability to provide good honey beer for guests or romantic partners was considered an attractive quality in both men and women. What it was like dating in ancient Egypt. So, you think modern dating is hard? Try dating in ancient Egypt, where your biggest competition wasn't someone with a better job or a six-pack, it was your own cousin. And I'm not talking distant cousin, I'm talking we share the same grandparents and everyone's totally cool with this cousin. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where the dating pool was smaller than a puddle and twice as murky. This is the story of how people found love when their idea of a romantic evening involved sharing a bowl of fermented fish sauce and praying the Nile didn't flood their first date. Let's start with what passed for hot in ancient Egypt. Forget everything you know about beauty standards because these people had some interesting ideas. First off, everyone, and I mean everyone, wore more makeup than a Las Vegas showgirl. Men wore eyeliner, women wore eyeliner. Probably their cats wore eyeliner. If you showed up to a date without your eyes looking like you'd been crying mascara tears, people would assume you were either very poor or very sick. The eyeliner wasn't just for show, though. They made it from lead, which meant, while you looked absolutely stunning, you were also slowly poisoning yourself. So ancient Egyptian dating was literally toxic. At least when modern relationships are toxic, it's just emotional damage. But the real kicker, the sexiest thing about a woman wasn't her figure or her face, it was her ability to look like she'd never worked a day in her life. Pale skin was everything because it meant you were rich enough to stay indoors while everyone else was out in the sun, probably building your pyramid. The beauty standard was basically sickly Victorian child, but make it Egyptian. And the men, well, they had their own problems. The ideal Egyptian man was supposed to be tall, muscular, and have a beard that said, "I'm manly," without saying, "I live in a cave." But here's the thing, most Egyptian men were about 5-6 inches on a good day and had the muscle definition of someone whose biggest workout was lifting a scroll. So basically, everyone was failing to meet beauty standards just like today, except with more deadly makeup. Hair was another nightmare. Both men and women wore wigs because apparently your natural hair wasn't good enough for ancient Egypt. These weren't cute little hair pieces either. We're talking full-on theatrical wigs made from human hair, sheep wool, or if you were really desperate, palm fibers. Imagine going on a date and having to worry about your wig falling off every time you laughed. Oh, you think I'm funny? Well, here's my scalp. The wealthy had human hair wigs that looked fantastic, while poor people had to make do with wigs that looked like they'd been styled by a drunk sheep, and everyone just pretended this was normal. Oh, nice wig, Katie. Thanks, it's made from my dead aunt's hair. Just another Tuesday in ancient Egypt. Now let's talk about getting ready for a date, which was more complicated than modern rocket science. First, you had to bathe in the Nile, which was basically a giant communal bathtub that crocodiles also used as their toilet. Nothing says romance like sharing your bathwater with apex predators. Then came the perfume situation, and oh boy, did ancient Egyptians have some creative ideas about what smelled attractive. Sure, they had the usual suspects like myrrh and frankincense, which actually smell nice, but they also thought crocodile fat was the height of luxury perfume. Crocodile fat. Imagine trying to seduce someone while smelling like you'd been wrestling reptiles all day. Hey baby, you smell different. Thanks, it's essence of crocodile. I'm going to go sacrifice myself to Sobek now. The middle class couldn't afford crocodile fat. Lucky them. So they made do with fish oil perfumes. Yes, fish oil. Because nothing says kiss me like smelling like last week's catch. Ancient Egyptian dating was basically a competition to see who could smell the weirdest and still get laid. And don't even get me started on their teeth. Ancient Egyptians had the worst dental hygiene in human history. Their bread was made with stone-ground grain that literally ground their teeth down to nubs. Everyone walked around with breath that could kill a mummy. They invented breath mints made from tree resin, which means they were basically chewing on Christmas trees to mask the fact that their mouths smelled like death. Picture this romantic scenario. You're on a date, you're wearing your finest wig made from questionable hair sources. You smell like either crocodile fat or rotting fish. Your teeth are ground down to painful stumps, and you're trying to impress someone who has identical problems. It's like a competition to see who could be the most unappealing while still maintaining the confidence to think they deserved love. The clothing situation was equally ridiculous. Men wore what were basically fancy skirts called kilts. These weren't just any skirts. They were starched and pleated to perfection. Imagine spending hours getting your skirt just right for a date. Hold on, let me just adjust my pleats. The wealthy had kilts so starched they could probably stand up and walk around by themselves. Poor guys had saggy kilts that looked like they'd been ironed with a brick. Women wore see-through dresses, not sheer, not translucent, straight up transparent. The message was clear: I'm hot, I'm rich, and I have nothing to hide. Except maybe the fact that maintaining a white see-through dress in a desert civilization was basically impossible. These women were spending more time doing laundry than dating, and everything had to be white. Everything. In a place where dust storms happened regularly and everyone traveled by donkey, they decided white clothing was the way to go. It's like they were playing life on expert mode. Let's make romance even harder by ensuring everyone's clothes show every speck of dirt. So where did people actually meet potential partners? Religious festivals, which were basically ancient Egypt's version of nightclubs, except with more gods and fewer cocktails. These festivals were the only time young people could mingle without their parents hovering over them like ancient helicopter parents. The festival of Opet was particularly popular for meeting people. Imagine a religious celebration where everyone gets drunk on beer and wine while parading statues of gods around town. It was part spiritual experience, part block party, part dating app. Young Egyptians would dress in their finest transparent clothing, douse themselves in crocodile fat, and hope their wig didn't fall off while they were trying to impress someone. But here's the catch. Everyone was watching. Your parents, your neighbors, your extended family, random priests, probably some judgmental cats. Privacy didn't exist. If you made eye contact with someone attractive, the entire community would know about it by dinner time. Did you see Amenhotep looking at Nefertiti during the god parade? I give them 2 weeks before they're married or one of them gets cursed. Flirting in ancient Egypt was an art form, and by art form I mean it was awkward and often involved poetry that would make modern slam poets weep with embarrassment. Love poems were huge, and they were intense. We're talking about verses like, "Your love is like a sycamore tree, and I am the bird that nests in your branches." Smooth, right? Nothing says romance like comparing your crush to a tree and yourself to a parasite. Men would write love letters that read like grocery lists of compliments. Your eyes are like stars, your hair is like the night sky, your teeth are like, well, maybe we'll skip the teeth part. The pressure to be poetic was enormous, which meant a lot of guys were walking around with scrolls full of terrible metaphors, hoping someone would find their literary disasters charming. Women weren't much better at the flirting game. They had their own collection of love poems that were equally cringeworthy. One famous example goes, "I wish I were your laundry servant so I could handle your clothes every day." That's not romantic. That's the ancient equivalent of saying, "I want to sniff your laundry." The fact that this was considered seductive poetry explains a lot about why ancient Egyptian relationships were so complicated. The really desperate people resorted to love spells, which were basically the ancient equivalent of sliding into someone's DMs, except with more dead animals and supernatural threats. These spells involved ingredients like hair from the person you liked, dirt from their footprints, and sometimes actual bodily fluids that I'm not going to describe because this is supposed to be educational content. One love spell instructed the love-struck individual to take a fish, write the name of their crush on it, and then feed it to a cat while reciting incantations. Because nothing says true love like involving random cats in your romantic schemes. Another spell required burning a lock of your own hair mixed with honey while chanting the person's name. Ancient Egyptians were basically setting themselves on fire for love, which is either very romantic or very concerning depending on your perspective. The most elaborate love spells involved creating little dolls of the person you wanted to seduce and then doing things to the doll that would make modern people call the police. They would pierce the dolls with needles while reciting spells like, "Just as this needle pierces this doll, so let passion pierce the heart of insert name here." It was like ancient voodoo, except instead of cursing enemies, they were trying to curse people into loving them. The desperation is almost admirable. But let's say your combination of terrible poetry, questionable perfume, and possibly illegal love magic actually worked, and someone agreed to date you. What then? Well, first you had to deal with their family, because privacy was about as common in ancient Egypt as smartphones. Family involvement in relationships was intense. Parents didn't just meet your potential partner. They conducted full background checks that would make the FBI jealous. They wanted to know about your family history, your financial prospects, your medical history, and probably your astrological sign. Dating someone meant dating their entire extended family, plus their neighbors, plus random people who had opinions about your relationship. The class system made everything more complicated. If you were a peasant farmer trying to date the daughter of a noble, you had about as much chance as a mummy in a swimming pool. Social mobility existed in ancient Egypt, but it was slower than the construction of the pyramids. Most people married within their social class, which meant your dating pool was not just limited by geography and family connections, but also by how much grain your family owned. Royal dating was its own special kind of nightmare. Pharaohs and their families were expected to marry other royals to keep the bloodline pure, which is a nice way of saying they married their siblings and cousins so often that their family trees looked like telephone poles. The most famous example is Cleopatra Sepharvan, who was married to both of her brothers at different times. Family reunions must have been incredibly awkward. How's married life, Cleopatra? Fine, except my husband is also my brother, so family dinners are weird. At least you know his relatives. The pressure on royal women to marry within the family was so intense that some of them probably looked forward to death just to escape the genetic lottery they were trapped in. Royal men had it slightly easier because they could take multiple wives and concubines, but that came with its own problems. Imagine having to remember the birthdays of 12 wives, all of whom might be your relatives. The gift-giving alone would bankrupt a modern person. For regular people, marriage negotiations were like business deals with feelings involved. Families would negotiate dowries, property arrangements, and what would happen if the marriage failed. The bride's family would provide household goods, jewelry, and sometimes land, while the groom's family provided financial security and a place to live. It was less "till death do us part" and more "till the prenup runs out." The actual wedding ceremonies were surprisingly simple compared to the elaborate negotiations that preceded them. There was no priest, no formal religious ceremony, just the couple moving in together and everyone agreeing that they were now married. The real ceremony was the party afterward, which could last for days and involved enough beer to float a boat. But here's where ancient Egyptian marriage gets interesting. Women had rights that would make modern feminists proud and ancient Greek women weep with envy. Egyptian women could own property, start businesses, initiate divorces, and even tell their husbands to sleep on the couch if they were being annoying. This was revolutionary for the ancient world, where most civilizations treated women like expensive furniture. Of course, having rights didn't mean relationships were easy. Ancient Egyptian marriage contracts included clauses about what happened if someone cheated, who got the household goods if they divorced, and how the children would be divided up. They were basically prenups written on papyrus, which suggests that even 3,000 years ago, people knew that love doesn't always last forever. Divorce in ancient Egypt was surprisingly common and refreshingly straightforward. If you wanted to end your marriage, you basically just announced it and divided up your stuff. There was no lengthy court battle, no lawyers, no judge asking who got the cat. You just said, "I'm done with this person," and moved on with your life. Women could initiate divorces for reasons including adultery, cruelty, or just general incompatibility. Men could divorce their wives for similar reasons, though they were expected to provide financial support afterward. The whole process was so casual that some couples probably got divorced and remarried multiple times, which sounds exhausting, but also kind of progressive. The aftermath of divorce could be dramatic, though. Rejected lovers sometimes turned to more elaborate curses and spells, trying to win back their exes or make their lives miserable. Ancient Egyptian divorce court was basically a magical battle between scorned lovers throwing hexes at each other while trying to divide up their furniture. Infidelity was another whole category of ancient relationship drama. Adultery was technically illegal, but enforcement was spotty at best. The wealthy and powerful could usually get away with it, while regular people faced social consequences that ranged from public embarrassment to actual legal punishment. But the real deterrent wasn't the law, it was the threat of supernatural revenge. Ancient Egyptians believed that adultery could anger the gods, leading to divine punishment that might include infertility, illness, or just general bad luck. So cheating on your spouse wasn't just morally wrong, it was cosmically dangerous. Some people still did it anyway because apparently the risk of supernatural retribution wasn't enough to overcome human horniness. The wealthy had mistresses and concubines, which was socially acceptable as long as it was done discreetly, and the main wife was treated with respect. Poor people couldn't afford multiple partners, so their adultery was just regular cheating without the fancy social structure to make it acceptable. Even in infidelity, class differences mattered. Let's talk about some specific examples of how badly ancient Egyptian dating could go, because nothing illustrates a culture like its spectacular romantic failures. Imagine you're a young Egyptian man named Keti, and you've been admiring Nebet, the daughter of a successful grain merchant. You've written her terrible poetry comparing her to various plants and animals. You've spent your life savings on a decent wig, and you've bathed in crocodile fat perfume. You approach Nebet at the festival of Hathor, confident in your romantic appeal. You recite your poem. Your beauty is like the flooding of the Nile, bringing life to my barren heart. She looks at you blankly. You realize she can't read, so your scroll full of love poetry is useless. You try to explain the metaphor verbally, but your breath mint made from tree resin has made your speech slurred and incomprehensible. Then your wig falls off. Not just slips a little, completely falls off, revealing your actual hair, which looks like it was styled by someone having a seizure. Nebet's friends start laughing. Her father notices the commotion and comes over to investigate. He takes one look at your exposed scalp, smells your crocodile fat perfume, and decides you're either cursed by the gods or just really bad at being human. You try to salvage the situation by offering to read her fortune from the stars, but it's the middle of the day, and there are no stars visible. You then attempt to impress her with your knowledge of Egyptian history, but you accidentally mix up which pharaoh built which pyramid, marking yourself as both stupid and potentially treasonous. By this point, Nebet has backed away so far, she's practically in the next gnome. Your wig is being investigated by a curious dog, and someone's grandfather is loudly explaining to anyone who will listen why young people today don't know how to court properly. You retreat in defeat, but not before stepping in a pile of sacred cat excrement, which means you'll have to go through purification rituals before you can enter any temple for the next month. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how dating disasters unfolded in ancient Egypt. No ghosting, no blocking on social media, just public humiliation that the entire community would remember and discuss for years. Remember when Keti's wig fell off at the Hathor festival? Good times. Or consider the plight of Ankhesenamun, a young woman whose father is pressuring her to marry her cousin Tutankhamun. She's not thrilled about the idea because Tut is about 10 years old and has a club foot. But royal marriages aren't about personal preference. They're about political alliances and keeping the bloodline pure. She tries to delay the marriage by claiming she's been cursed by a jealous goddess and needs time for spiritual purification. This backfires when the palace priests take her seriously and subject her to months of ritual cleansing that involves fasting, prayer, and bathing in increasingly bizarre combinations of blessed water and animal parts. Meanwhile, young Tutankhamun is dealing with his own romantic anxieties. He's trying to impress his future wife by demonstrating his pharaonic authority, but he's still a child whose voice cracks every time he tries to sound commanding. His attempts at royal dignity are undermined by the fact that he needs a step stool to sit on his throne and has to have his official declarations read aloud by an adult because he can't project his voice loud enough for official ceremonies. The wedding eventually happens anyway, because royal marriages in ancient Egypt were less about love and more about preventing civil wars. Ankhesenamun and Tutankhamun make the best of it, but their relationship is essentially a political alliance between two teenagers who have nothing in common except shared DNA and an overwhelming sense of duty. Their marriage produces no surviving children, possibly because they're both dealing with the genetic consequences of generations of inbreeding, or possibly because it's hard to maintain a romantic relationship when your husband is also your stepbrother, and you both know this marriage is primarily about maintaining political stability rather than personal happiness. The pressure on royal couples to produce heirs was enormous. Every aspect of their intimate life was subject to public scrutiny and religious interpretation. If they didn't have children quickly enough, it was seen as a sign of divine displeasure. If they had too many daughters and not enough sons, it was a political crisis. If they had no children at all, it meant the dynasty might end, and someone would have to find a new pharaoh, which was the ancient equivalent of a hostile corporate takeover. For non-royal Egyptians, the pressure was different but equally intense. Children were seen as economic assets who would support their parents in old age and continue the family line. A marriage without children was considered a failure, not just personally, but socially and economically. This led to some truly desperate measures, including fertility rituals that involved everything from drinking special potions to sleeping with amulets made from crocodile teeth. The most elaborate fertility rituals required couples to visit the temple of specific gods known for their reproductive powers. They would make offerings, recite prayers, and sometimes participate in religious ceremonies that were basically ancient fertility treatments with more incense and fewer medical professionals. Some of these rituals were so explicit that modern archaeologists are still debating whether certain hieroglyphs are religious symbolism or ancient pornography. But let's say everything worked out. You found someone willing to overlook your terrible poetry, your questionable personal hygiene, and your genetic relationship to them. You've successfully navigated the complex social negotiations required for marriage in ancient Egypt. You've survived the wedding ceremony, the community celebration, and the first few months of figuring out how to live with another person who has equally poor dental hygiene and strange ideas about attractive perfumes. What was daily married life actually like in ancient Egypt? Well, it depended entirely on your social class, but for most people it was a lot of work interrupted by brief moments of romance and longer periods of just trying not to die from preventable diseases. Wealthy couples had it relatively easy. They lived in nice houses with multiple rooms, had servants to do the cooking and cleaning, and could afford leisure activities like hunting, fishing, and attending cultural events. Their biggest marital problems were probably boredom and the pressure to maintain their social status while avoiding political intrigue that could get their entire family executed. Middle-class couples had their own homes, but did most of their own work. The husband might be a scribe, artisan, or small merchant, while the wife managed the household and possibly ran her own small business. Their relationship was more of a partnership, with both people contributing to the family's economic survival. Their biggest challenges were economic instability and the constant threat of disease or injury that could destroy their financial security. Poor couples had it the hardest. They often lived in single-room houses made of mud brick, with multiple generations crammed together in spaces smaller than modern bathrooms. Privacy was non-existent. Romance was a luxury they couldn't afford, and their primary concern was survival rather than relationship satisfaction. But here's what's fascinating about ancient Egyptian marriage across all social classes. Women retained their legal independence even after marriage. They could own property, start businesses, and make financial decisions without their husband's permission. This was revolutionary for the ancient world, and suggests that Egyptian marriages were more like modern partnerships than the property arrangements that characterized most ancient civilizations. Of course, legal equality didn't mean social equality. Women were still expected to defer to their husbands in public, manage the household, and produce children. But they had options if the marriage didn't work out, which was more than most ancient women could say about their situations. The documentation we have about ancient Egyptian relationships comes from a variety of sources: legal documents, love poetry, religious texts, and personal letters. These sources give us glimpses into the emotional lives of people who lived thousands of years ago, and what's striking is how familiar their relationship problems sound. We have letters from husbands complaining that their wives spend too much money on cosmetics and jewelry. We have letters from wives complaining that their husbands drink too much beer and don't help around the house. We have love poems from teenagers who think their crushes are the most perfect beings ever created by the gods. We have divorce documents that read like modern custody agreements, complete with detailed arrangements for property division and child support. One particularly entertaining set of documents involves a court case where a woman sued her ex-husband for stealing her furniture after their divorce. The testimony includes detailed descriptions of who owned which pots, which linens belonged to whom, and a heated dispute over a particularly nice chair that both parties claimed to have brought into the marriage. It's exactly the kind of petty post-divorce drama that happens today, except with more references to divine justice and fewer lawyers. Another fascinating document is a collection of love spells found in a tomb, apparently belonging to a woman who had been unlucky in love. The spells include instructions for making men fall in love with you, techniques for keeping a lover faithful, and rather alarmingly specific curses to inflict on romantic rivals. One spell involves creating a wax figure of a romantic competitor and then melting it while reciting incantations about how the rival's beauty will fade and their lovers will abandon them. Ancient Egyptian women didn't mess around when it came to romantic competition, but perhaps the most revealing documents are the personal letters between married couples. These letters show that despite all the social constraints, political arrangements, and economic pressures surrounding Egyptian marriages, many couples developed genuine affection for each other. They write about missing each other when separated, worrying about each other's health, and sharing jokes that only they understand. One letter from a husband to his wife includes the line, "I think about you constantly, like a man obsessed with beer thinks about drinking." It's not exactly Shakespeare, but it's sweetly honest about the nature of ancient Egyptian romantic obsession. Another letter from a woman to her husband says, "You are more precious to me than all the gold in Nubia," which was probably the ancient equivalent of saying, "You're worth more than Jeff Bezos's entire fortune." These glimpses of genuine affection are particularly touching when you consider the context. These were people living in a harsh environment where life expectancy was short, infant mortality was high, and political instability could destroy entire families overnight. Finding love and companionship under those circumstances required a level of optimism and resilience that's genuinely admirable. The religious aspect of ancient Egyptian relationships was complex and often contradictory. On one hand, the gods were supposed to protect and bless marriages. On the other hand, many of the same gods were notorious for their own relationship disasters. The Egyptian pantheon was full of divine couples who cheated on each other, fought constantly, or engaged in behavior that would get modern people arrested. Take Osiris and Isis, who were supposed to be the ideal married couple. Their story involves Osiris being murdered by his brother Set, chopped into pieces and scattered across Egypt. Isis has to find all the pieces and magically reassemble her husband, except she can't find his penis, so she has to make him a new one out of clay. They then conceive a child, Horus, through magical necrophilia. This was considered the ultimate love story in ancient Egypt, which gives you some idea of their standards for romantic ideals. Or consider Hathor, the goddess of love, who was also associated with drunkenness and violent rage. She was worshipped as the patron of lovers and married couples, but her myths include stories about her going on murderous rampages that had to be stopped by getting her so drunk she passed out. Ancient Egyptians prayed to a love goddess who might either bless their relationships or murder everyone in a drunken fury. The uncertainty must have added an interesting element to wedding prayers. The most popular love goddess was probably Bees, a dwarf god who looked like a cross between a lion and a very angry garden gnome. Despite his unprepossessing appearance, Bees was responsible for protecting households, marriages, and childbirth. Ancient Egyptian couples would put statues of Bees in their bedrooms, which means they were literally having sex under the watchful gaze of a divine creature that looked like it wanted to bite someone. The psychological implications are fascinating and probably best left unexplored. Religious festivals provided opportunities for courtship, but they also created their own romantic complications. The Festival of Drunkenness, dedicated to Hathor, involved ritual intoxication that was supposed to recreate the goddess's mythical drinking binge. Young people would get spectacularly drunk while their parents watched approvingly, because religious intoxication was considered spiritually beneficial. This led to a lot of relationships that started with, "So we were both completely hammered at the Hathor festival, and the next thing I knew we were engaged." The combination of religious obligation, family pressure, and alcohol-fueled social events created a dating environment that was simultaneously more and less complicated than modern relationships. On one hand, everyone knew exactly what was expected of them. Get married, have children, don't anger the gods. On the other hand, fulfilling those expectations while navigating complex social hierarchies, economic constraints, and the ever-present threat of divine retribution was incredibly stressful. Ancient Egyptian breakup strategies were as varied and creative as their courtship methods. Since divorce was legal and relatively straightforward, many couples simply agreed to end their marriages and moved on. But for relationships that couldn't or wouldn't end officially, people got creative with their revenge fantasies. The aforementioned love spells could be reversed to become hate spells, designed to make ex-lovers miserable, unsuccessful, or romantically unlucky. These spells often involved burying cursed objects near the target's house, writing their name on pottery shards and then breaking them, or creating elaborate rituals involving dead animals and bodily fluids that would make modern restraining orders look quaint by comparison. One particularly vindictive breakup spell involved writing the ex-lover's name on a piece of papyrus, wrapping it around a dead mouse, and then burying the whole thing at a crossroads while reciting curses about how the target would never find love again. It's the ancient equivalent of posting revenge porn, except with more dead rodents and supernatural implications. But the most savage ancient Egyptian breakup move was social ostracism. In a culture where your reputation was everything and everyone knew everyone else's business, being publicly rejected or divorced could destroy your prospects for future relationships. Some scorned lovers would deliberately spread rumors about their ex's sexual performance, personal hygiene, or family history, effectively ruining their dating chances for years to come. The wealthy had different breakup problems. Royal divorces were political crises that could destabilize entire kingdoms. Noble divorces involved complex property negotiations that could bankrupt families, and everyone involved had to worry about whether their romantic drama was going to inspire their political enemies to use their personal lives as weapons in larger power struggles. Consider the romantic disasters of Akhenaten, the pharaoh who tried to revolutionize Egyptian religion and ended up creating a political crisis that lasted for generations. His marriage to Nefertiti was initially seen as a great love match. They were frequently depicted together in official art, appearing affectionate and devoted to each other. But as Akhenaten became more obsessed with his religious reforms, their relationship deteriorated. Nefertiti eventually disappeared from official records, leading to centuries of speculation about whether she died, was exiled, or just got fed up with her husband's theological obsessions and moved to a nice villa somewhere to live quietly under an assumed name. Their marriage went from being the ideal royal romance to a cautionary tale about what happens when you let religious fanaticism interfere with your relationship. Meanwhile, their daughters were dealing with their own romantic complications. Royal children in the Amarna period were expected to marry each other to keep the bloodline pure, but there weren't enough male heirs to go around. This led to some extremely creative family arrangements that would make modern genealogists weep with confusion. Sisters married brothers, daughters married fathers, and everyone just pretended this was normal and definitely not going to have any negative genetic consequences.
The aftermath of Akhenaten's reign included a systematic effort to erase his memory from official records, which meant that his romantic legacy was literally carved out of stone and thrown away. Future pharaohs didn't just reject his religious reforms, they rejected his entire approach to royal marriage and family relationships. It was the ancient equivalent of unfriending someone on Facebook, except with more chisels and political implications. For ordinary Egyptians, romantic disasters were more personal but equally memorable. Community gossip was the primary form of entertainment, so everyone's relationship problems became public knowledge whether they wanted them to or not. A messy breakup could provide years of conversation material for entire neighborhoods. The most entertaining breakup stories involved people who had invested heavily in love magic and then had to watch their spells backfire spectacularly. There are records of individuals who cast love spells on specific people, only to have the targets fall in love with someone else entirely, or fall in love with the spellcaster, but in a creepy, obsessive way that made everyone uncomfortable. One papyrus fragment describes a woman who tried to use magic to make a man fall in love with her, but accidentally made him fall in love with her best friend instead. The ensuing drama involved accusations of magical sabotage, a friendship-ending fight, and a romantic triangle that scandalized their entire village. It's basically a soap opera plot, except with more supernatural elements and fewer commercial breaks. Another document tells the story of a man who became convinced that his wife was using love magic to control him. He hired a priest to perform counter spells, which led to an escalating magical battle between the couple that involved increasingly elaborate rituals and larger quantities of dead animals. The marriage ended when the neighbors complained to local authorities about the smell coming from all the magical ingredients they were burning in their backyard. These stories illustrate an important point about ancient Egyptian relationships. They took love magic seriously, but they also understood that it could go horribly wrong. The same culture that believed in the power of spells and curses also developed elaborate systems for dealing with the consequences when those spells didn't work as intended. The legal system included provisions for dealing with magical disputes between former lovers. Courts could order people to stop casting spells on each other, return magical objects that belonged to their exes, or pay compensation for curses that had caused actual harm. Ancient Egyptian judges had to be part legal expert, part relationship counselor, and part expert on supernatural warfare. But perhaps the most telling aspect of ancient Egyptian dating culture was their literature. The love poetry that survives from this period reveals a society that genuinely valued romantic love, even when practical considerations dominated most marriages. These poems express emotions that are immediately recognizable to modern readers: the excitement of new love, the pain of rejection, the joy of mutual affection, and the awkwardness of trying to express deep feelings in words. One love poem includes the lines, "My heart remembers your love, half of my heart is gone from its place, I hurry to see you." Another says, "I wish I were her laundry servant for just 1 month. Then I would be strengthened by touching the clothes that touch her body." These aren't sophisticated verses, but they're genuine expressions of romantic obsession that transcend cultural and temporal boundaries. The fact that ancient Egyptians wrote love poetry at all suggests that despite all the practical constraints on their relationships, they still believed in romance as something worth celebrating and preserving. They understood that love was both a practical necessity and an emotional experience that deserved artistic expression. Their approach to relationships was simultaneously more and less romantic than modern dating. More romantic because they wrote poetry for their crushes and believed in the power of love to transcend social boundaries. Less romantic because those social boundaries were very real, and most marriages were economic arrangements with emotional benefits, rather than love matches with economic consequences. But what's most remarkable about ancient Egyptian dating culture is how much it resembles modern relationships once you strip away the specific cultural details. People worried about their appearance, struggled with social anxiety, dealt with family pressure, navigated economic constraints, and tried to find genuine connection with other human beings who had their own complicated lives and expectations. They made the same mistakes we make. They fell for people who were wrong for them. They stayed in bad relationships too long. They let their insecurities sabotage good relationships. And they occasionally resorted to desperate measures when they felt like love was slipping away from them. The main difference is that their desperate measures involved more dead animals and fewer text messages. The technology was different, but the fundamental human experiences were identical. Ancient Egyptians felt the same butterflies when they saw their crushes, the same anxiety about whether their feelings were reciprocated, the same joy when relationships worked out, and the same pain when they didn't. They just expressed these feelings through different cultural frameworks and with significantly worse dental hygiene. So the next time you're complaining about modern dating, about online profiles and ghosting and mixed signals, remember the ancient Egyptians. They had to navigate romance while wearing wigs made from dead people's hair, smelling like crocodile fat, and worrying about whether their love spells would accidentally curse the wrong person. They couldn't swipe left on inappropriate matches. They had to smile politely while their parents tried to arrange marriages with their cousins. They didn't have dating apps, But they had religious festivals where everyone got drunk and made poor romantic decisions while the gods watched judgmentally. They didn't have social media to stalk their exes, but they had community gossip networks that were probably more effective than Facebook at spreading embarrassing personal information. And honestly, they might have been onto something with some of their approaches. Take their attitude toward marriage equality between men and women. Ancient Egyptian women had more legal rights in relationships than women in many parts of the world today. They could initiate divorce, own property, and tell their husbands exactly what they thought without fear of legal repercussions. Sure, they had to smell like fish oil while doing it, but at least they had the legal framework to support their romantic independence. Their approach to beauty was also refreshingly egalitarian in its ridiculousness. Both men and women were expected to wear makeup, style their hair elaborately, and smell weird. Modern dating puts most of the appearance pressure on women, but ancient Egyptians were equal opportunity sufferers when it came to beauty standards. Everyone got to experience the joy of worrying about their wig falling off during an important romantic moment. The ancient Egyptian dating scene also had a certain honesty that modern relationships sometimes lack. When they arranged marriages based on economic considerations, everyone involved knew exactly what they were getting into. There was no pretending that love was the only factor. It was explicitly a business arrangement that hopefully would develop emotional benefits over time. Compare that to modern relationships where people pretend their choice of partner has nothing to do with financial stability, social status, or family approval, when obviously those factors still matter enormously. Their love magic, while clearly ineffective from a practical standpoint, served an important psychological function. It gave people a sense of agency in romantic situations where they otherwise had very little control. If your parents were pressuring you to marry someone you didn't like, at least you could cast a spell to try to make someone you did like fall in love with you. It probably didn't work, but it made people feel like they were actively participating in their own romantic destiny rather than just passively accepting whatever fate handed them. The elaborate courtship rituals, while time-consuming and expensive, also serve to demonstrate commitment in a way that modern casual dating doesn't. If someone was willing to spend months writing terrible poetry for you, commission custom jewelry, and risk public humiliation by performing at religious festivals, they were probably serious about the relationship. Modern dating's efficiency comes at the cost of certainty. It's much easier to start dating someone today, but it's also much easier for them to disappear without explanation. Ancient Egyptian breakups, while often involving supernatural revenge fantasies, were also remarkably practical. Divorce was legal, property rights were clear, and children's welfare was protected by law. Compare that to modern breakups, which can involve years of legal battles, unclear custody arrangements, and financial devastation that ancient Egyptian divorce courts managed to avoid through clear prenuptial agreements and established social protocols. But perhaps the most important lesson from ancient Egyptian dating culture is that romantic love has always been both universal and culturally specific. The emotions were the same. People fell in love, got their hearts broken, worried about their appearance, and dreamed about finding their perfect match. But the expression of those emotions was shaped by the specific constraints and opportunities of their society. Ancient Egyptians couldn't travel widely to meet potential partners, so they made the most of local festivals and family connections. They couldn't communicate privately across distances, so they developed elaborate systems of public courtship that involved the entire community. They couldn't rely on modern medicine to solve fertility problems, so they developed complex, magical, and religious rituals to address reproductive anxieties. Their solutions were products of their time and place, but the problems they were trying to solve are timeless. How do you find someone compatible? How do you express romantic interest without making yourself vulnerable to rejection? How do you balance personal desires with family expectations? How do you maintain a relationship over time when both people are changing and growing? How do you handle the end of a relationship with dignity and grace? These are the same questions people ask today, and ancient Egyptians' answers were no more or less successful than modern approaches. They just involved more dead fish and less texting. The archaeological record suggests that many ancient Egyptian marriages were genuinely happy despite the practical constraints and social pressures. Tomb paintings show couples holding hands, sharing meals, and participating in activities together. Love letters between married couples express real affection and concern for each other's welfare. Legal documents show spouses protecting each other's interests and making provisions for each other's care. This evidence suggests that while ancient Egyptian dating was complicated by factors that modern people don't have to worry about, like whether your perfume contained enough crocodile fat to be impressive, or whether your love spell might accidentally curse the wrong person, people still managed to find genuine connection and lasting happiness with their partners. Their success rate probably wasn't any worse than modern relationships, and in some ways might have been better. Divorce rates were significant, but not catastrophic. Most people who wanted to get married eventually did. Children were generally wanted and cared for. Extended families provided support networks that helped couples weather difficult times. The key difference was expectations. Ancient Egyptians didn't expect marriage to fulfill all their emotional needs, provide all their social connection, and serve as their primary source of personal identity. Marriage was one important relationship among many, embedded in larger networks of family, community, and religious obligation. This probably reduced the pressure on individual relationships and made them more likely to succeed. Modern dating places enormous pressure on romantic relationships to provide everything: emotional support, social connection, financial partnership, sexual satisfaction, personal growth, and entertainment. Ancient Egyptian marriages were expected to provide economic stability, social respectability, and hopefully some degree of personal compatibility. But other needs were met through extended family, religious community, and social networks. This distributed approach to human needs might actually be healthier than modern romantic expectations. When your marriage doesn't have to be your entire social world, it's easier to appreciate what it does provide without being disappointed by what it doesn't. But let's not romanticize ancient Egyptian relationships too much. The constraints were real and often harsh. Social mobility was limited, so most people couldn't marry outside their class. Geographic mobility was also limited, so your choice of partners was restricted to people who lived within walking distance. Family pressure could be overwhelming, and individual preferences were often ignored in favor of political or economic considerations. Women, despite having more legal rights than women in other ancient civilizations, were still expected to prioritize family responsibilities over personal ambitions. Men were expected to provide financial support for extended families and couldn't always choose careers that would make them personally happy. Everyone was subject to religious and social expectations that limited their options and defined their roles in ways that modern people would find suffocating. The health conditions were also genuinely terrible. Bad teeth weren't just cosmetically unappealing, they were painful and could lead to life-threatening infections. Poor nutrition meant that many people were dealing with chronic health problems that affected their energy, mood, and overall quality of life. High infant mortality rates meant that pregnancy and childbirth were genuinely dangerous, and couples had to cope with the regular loss of children. Life expectancy was short, which meant that relationships had to develop quickly and intensively. There wasn't time for the extended courtship periods that modern people often enjoy. By the time you figured out whether you were compatible with someone, you might already have children together and established economic interdependence that made it difficult to change course. These constraints created a different kind of romantic intensity than what modern people experience. Ancient Egyptian relationships had to be practical because survival depended on making good choices quickly, but they also had to be emotionally satisfying because people needed connection and support to cope with the genuine hardships of ancient life. The result was a dating culture that was simultaneously more pragmatic and more romantic than modern relationships. More pragmatic because everyone understood that marriage was primarily an economic and social arrangement. More romantic because within those constraints, people still wrote poetry, performed love songs, created beautiful art, and developed deep emotional bonds that sustained them through difficult circumstances. Their love letters, poems, and artistic representations show people who understood that romance was both a luxury and a necessity. A luxury because survival didn't technically require emotional connection, but a necessity because life without love was barely worth living. This tension between practical necessity and emotional desire created a culture that valued both stability and passion, security and excitement. Modern dating has solved many of the practical problems that made ancient Egyptian romance difficult. We have better hygiene, more choices, greater mobility, improved communication, and legal frameworks that protect individual rights. But we've also lost some of the community support, clear expectations, and shared cultural frameworks that helped ancient couples build lasting relationships. The trade-offs are complex. Modern people have more freedom to choose their own partners, but also less guidance about how to make those choices wisely. We have more privacy, but also less community support when relationships get difficult. We have more opportunities to meet potential partners, but also more options to distract us from committing fully to any particular relationship. Ancient Egyptians couldn't swipe left on unsuitable matches, but they also couldn't spend years scrolling through potential partners without ever making a real connection. They couldn't ghost people who became inconvenient, but they also couldn't be ghosted by people who lost interest. Their dating pool was smaller, but their community investment in their relationships was much larger. The question isn't whether ancient Egyptian dating was better or worse than modern romance. It's what we can learn from their approaches to the universal human challenges of finding and maintaining love. Their solutions were products of their specific cultural context, but the underlying insights about human nature, relationship dynamics, and social support remain relevant. They understood that attraction involves multiple factors: physical appearance, social status, personal compatibility, and family connections. They recognized that relationships require both emotional connection and practical partnership. They knew that individual desires have to be balanced against community expectations and family responsibilities. They accepted that love is both magical and mundane, both transcendent and deeply practical. Most importantly, they understood that romance is fundamentally about hope. Hope that someone else will find you worth loving, hope that you can build something meaningful together, hope that connection is possible even in difficult circumstances. Their love spells, terrible poetry, and elaborate courtship rituals were all expressions of this fundamental optimism about human connection. That hope is the same whether you're an ancient Egyptian farmer trying to impress someone at a religious festival, or a modern person crafting the perfect dating app profile. The methods change, but the underlying human need for love, connection, and understanding remains constant across cultures and centuries. So yes, ancient Egyptian dating was weird, complicated, and often involved questionable personal hygiene choices, but it was also recognizably human in all the ways that matter. They fell in love, got their hearts broken, worried about their appearance, dealt with family drama, and tried to find someone who would understand them and stick around even when things got difficult. They just did it all while smelling like crocodile fat and worrying about whether their wigs would stay on during important romantic moments, which, when you think about it, probably required even more confidence than modern dating. If you could successfully seduce someone while wearing a dead person's hair and smelling like reptile perfume, you were clearly operating on a level of romantic confidence that modern people can only aspire to achieve. And that might be the most important lesson of all. Love has always required courage, optimism, and a willingness to risk looking ridiculous in pursuit of something that might make life worth living. Ancient Egyptians understood this, which is why they wrote love poetry, cast elaborate spells, and showed up to festivals wearing their finest transparent clothing and most impressive wigs, hoping that someone would see past the crocodile fat perfume and appreciate the person underneath. That kind of romantic courage is timeless, even if the specific methods of expressing it change with each civilization.
Love remains one of humanity's most persistent and universal experiences, connecting us across millennia to people who face the same fundamental challenges of the heart, even if they did it with significantly more animal fat and worse dental hygiene than we're accustomed to today.